Welcome back to another episode of One-on-One with Mitch Lafon. I'm your host, Mitch Lafon, and this week I am joined by Killer Dwarfs vocalist Russ Dwarf. Good day, Russ.
Good day, Mitch.
And we've got another sidekick or co-host this week, Metal Tim Henderson, who operates probably the greatest metal site on the web, BraveWords.com.
Well, that is some mighty fine words. Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Yeah, and you know, a purveyor of Canadian metal. You've been in the scene since what, 1994?
Mid-'80s when I was at McMaster. That's pretty much when I started college radio there.
Wow.
Got the bug.
Wow. And then, but BraveWords itself started around 94, right?
We are celebrating our 20th anniversary. In fact, May 2014 would have been the exact month of our 20th anniversary. So it's this whole year is our 20th anniversary celebrations, and how fitting is that when we are going to be relaunching BraveWords.com in the coming weeks.
Oh, great. So the whole new redesign and all that stuff, or?
Everything. As they say, it's a fresh coat of paint, but I think actually we're moving houses. It's not just the paint. It's the whole frame.
That's very exciting. BraveWords has been very important in supporting Canadian metal. I mean, without BraveWords, I probably would not have heard of Annihilator. I probably would not have heard of Strapping Young Lad. So it's been very essential in keeping fans informed.
Well, thank you. It's been a fun ride. Well, we're fans just like everyone else, right? So it's just like I have the benefit of getting out of bed and kind of working at a hobby that I know and love.
Yeah. Now, before we get into today's episode, let me remind you that today's episode is brought to you by the Heavy Montreal Festival, taking place August 9th and 10th in beautiful downtown Montreal. And this year features Metallica, Slayer, Offspring, Lamb of God, Anthrax, Twisted Sister, and every other band that I certainly love. And I think I named a lot of bands that Tim loves in that little intro.
Absolutely. Huge fest this year. My God, it's amazing how it's grown.
Yeah.
Being going to Vaughan for so many years, and this being the 25th anniversary of Vaughan, it's nice to see there's a Canadian festival trying to catch up. They never will, obviously, because of when they started. But no, it's amazing to have Metallica. My gosh, yes, it's a long time coming.
Yeah, I think by having Metallica on the bill, it brings the festival to another level. First of all, bands that haven't come are going to say, wait a minute, if Metallica can play it, we should consider it too. And quite frankly, they probably should just get Metallica to play every year one night, because you're guaranteed 50,000 people.
And guaranteed you'll be there.
Yeah, well, I'll be there. I'll be there anyway. I know you there. So, on this episode, we've also got two interviews. We've got Rick Hughes of the band Sword, and of course, Jason Rockman of the band Slaves on Dope. Why don't we start there, Tim and Russ? The band Sword, they toured with Metallica back in the, I think it was 83 or 80, no, probably 86. Tim, what's your take on the band Sword?
You know what? They, I think they actually benefited from the whole Much Music phenomenon, because that's where I learned about Stoned Again and Follow the Wheel, two of the greatest. It's kind of, they fall into the category of like the dark hair metal, kind of biking metal. They weren't as heavy as, say, an Annihilator, but no, it was just really powerful, fist in the air, biker music for the most part. Amazing, absolutely amazing. And stoner music, I guess.
Yeah. And what about you, Russ? Did you ever get a chance to tour with them?
We didn't tour with them, but, we crossed paths for sure, because we're exactly at the same time. Like our first album came out in 83, and I think they were around 86 or something. But I always loved, they're a great band, and I love their album covers. They had really great album artwork as well.
Yeah, they actually, their first album, Metalized, was in 86, and they got to open for Metallica on the Master of Puppets tour. What a great slot.
Well, they played with Metallica, but didn't they play with I think Cooper and
yeah. Oh yeah, they played with Motorhead. Yeah.
They had some great opportunities, definitely.
They were a big band. They had a great label push. They were selling a ton of records. Like I used to watch those videos for both Stoned Again and Follow the Wheel like all the time. They were on regular rotation. not a big fan of CanCon, but even the Killer Dwarf stuff. You know what I mean? We saw these videos all the time. It was amazing.
That was for us, bands from that time period. Since we didn't have what we have today as far as social media and internet and everything, that was the absolute bonus for young bands that had not a lot of money. All of a sudden you're on national television a couple times a day, maybe when the kids got home from school and they saw, the Pepsi Power Hour or,
J.D. Roberts. There you go.
J.D. Roberts was the first. It was the first time we ever did an interview. I think at Much Music. I think it was just the new music then, back in those days. But absolutely, that's how we got to know these bands too, as well.
Why don't we sit back and listen to Rick Hughes in a brand new 2014 interview, reminisce about the Metallica tour and tell you what's going to happen with Sword, because the band is not done. There's more to come. Here's Rick. And we are one-on-one today with Rick Hughes of Canadian heavy metal band Sword. Good day, Rick. How are you?
I'm fine, Mitch. How are you?
Good. So, Sword is one of these sort of classic Canadian bands that came out of the 80s. And, one of the most memorable things you did was that tour with Metallica, the Master of Puppets tour in 86. Let's start there. How was it being on that tour with a band which essentially were rookies? I mean, they weren't exactly Metallica of what we think of now. What was it like in 86?
Well, one thing's for sure is that for us was the best of time. For them, it was the worst of time.
Huh?
If you go back to when we actually toured with them, it's exactly when Cliff Burton died. Exactly.
Oh, that's right.
The way it happened, the way it happened is that we got approached by the management because Burton was still touring with them. They were happy. They've been playing together forever, so they were like brothers, right? So they started to do like watching like TV commercials for the shows, and they were announcing Sword with Metallica, and everybody would say, "Hey, you must be really happy. The show's coming in like a month." Yeah. We're real happy, but then the sad news came that there was an accident, so that they had to cancel everything.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the way it happened. So we got back to the rehearsals. We got back to doing our stuff, and at that time, this is a long time ago. A lot of people don't remember that there was a question that was the end of Metallica right there, because
that's right.
It's like Zeppelin. Zeppelin without Bonham. Some people knew. They knew. There was no way to replace him. So Cliff was a really hard member to replace. So they did it, and then they announced the tour. But listen to this, Mitch. It was on TV. There was an advertisement for the show. And then we had a news that James Hetfield had broke his arm. They broke his arm. He was doing at that time skateboarding.
Right.
So he had a skateboarding accident. He broke his arm. So again, the tour was so listen. When it finally happened, it was like we couldn't. The first show I did, I was on stage. I said to myself, "Okay, now I believe it."
But it must have been great, though. I mean, could you sense that Metallica was headed for this stardom? Could you sense that they were going to just survive and just be this larger-than-life kind of band?
Oh, I'm not sure. I don't think so. I don't think so. Anybody could have thought the future for them, because it became so big, so important, so Metallica. A world without Metallica is like unimaginable. That's where the metal is best, is with Metallica. Man. Period. Even today, stuff that comes out today, sometimes when it's really, really good, you hear Anthrax, you go, "Wow, is that a new Metallica single?"
Yeah, you do.
No, it's another. Huh?
You do, actually. There's a lot of influence with Metallica, even today.
They were the best, Mitch. They were the best. And the way it happened with Sword is that they've always been a band to support new artists. So Lars was having dinner with somebody, and that person gave him a tape of Swords Metalized. A tape of Swords Metalized.
Right.
We're from that era, Mitch. We're all guys, eh?
I know. That's what I want to get to. I want to get to Metalized, but finish the story first.
Okay, so he got back to the tour bus with the Metalized cassette, and they played that face A, face B, face A, face B, because they told us the story after. So we were here in Quebec listening to Master of Puppet in our car, face A, face B, face doing basically the same stuff. And we got a phone call from their management telling, hey, Metallica really wants you to support them on their Canadian dates and maybe more and stuff. And we fell off our chairs, that's the way it happened.
Wow. So let's go back to Metalized. This album came out almost 30 years ago. A great Canadian, metal album. But how do you get into metal? I mean, you're French Canadian. You're from Montreal. At the time, Bon Jovi was hot. Def Leppard was hot. Motley Crue was hot. How did you get together and break into the market?
Only you, Mitch, can ask a question with so much depth. Because, I know, seriously, this is a really, really good question. Why? Well, we were influenced. There was like a lot of bands being influenced by different bands, Mm-hmm. Us, it was Sabbath, Maiden, Priest. Sabbath, Maiden, Priest. Don't ask me why. Those were the bands that when we were like in the garage, when we were with friends at parties, and we would jam, we'd do like Victim of Change, lots of Black Sabbath, Sweet Leaf, Paranoid, Fairies Wear Boots, War Pigs.
Yeah, I don't need to ask why. I think we know why. Those are three of the greatest bands ever. Exactly. Same goes with Maiden. I mean, Maiden at that time, my influence as a vocalist was Robert Plant and Ian Gillan and Paul McCartney. Okay, those are the three. For me, these guys are like a monarchy. But Dickinson at his best, oh my Lord, what a voice, what a soul. Everything was there. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the album comes out in '86, and of course you do the tour with Metallica. What happens after that? Well, the band, you only lasted for 2 albums. So
yeah.
Was it financial pressure? What was the Canadian market not supporting you? Was it a personal decision to say, okay, I've had enough? Or was it just tough in Canada? Because back in the day, Canada was Bryan Adams, Luba, Glass Tiger, Honeymoon Suite, great bands or great artists, but not metal.
Yeah, very corporate and yeah. Well, the easy answer to that question is all of the above. All of that you've mentioned were all factors of why we only did 2 albums. So you said Crisis Amongst Life at Home, and there's a lot going as factors, but the main reason for me, I cannot speak for the other members of Sword, is that if you go back at the end of the 80s, as we got like from 1985 to 1990, it's either you got heavier or you got less heavy.
Yeah.
There was no staying there. Something had to happen. So lots of bands went for the heavier part, and lots of bands went for the cleaner sound. So in a way, we tried the cleaner sound because there was no way for me I would go into death metal and that stuff. It's not that I don't like it. It's not that I don't acknowledge, that it's a form of art. But for me, it didn't do anything at all. So we hired a second guitar player when we finished recording the Sword Sweet Dream album,
right.
And by hiring that guitar player, Mike Plant, who had been the main songwriter for the music for Sword for 10 years, left the band saying, I gotta go work, find a job, find a real job. This doesn't pay the bills, you know. So the new guitar player brought a new sound. So lots of people said, yeah, after Sword, you went and did Saints and Sinners. No, it all fell into place, you know, because once Mike left and Stéphane Dussault became the guitar player, then it's a sound that came about, you know. It didn't sound like Sword anymore, so we couldn't call it Sword. We changed the name. So by doing that, the other members left, so it was up to Stéphane and me. So we went with Saints and Sinners for a while, and toured with Bon Jovi and a couple of artists here and there.
Alice Cooper too.
Yeah, Alice Cooper. But by 1992, then came grunge.
And
so everybody, musicians, artists at that time, especially pop rock artists, were like confused because one day it was metal, the other day it was glam rock, and then it was all Finnish, and then it became Seattle. Everything that was from Seattle that was grunge was in, all the rest was out. Well, that left a lot of people unemployed, believe me.
And that left you unemployed too. So then you started singing French music, or when did you start getting into the French stuff?
Well, when that happened, when the grunge period installed itself, let's call it like that, I couldn't be a grunge artist, so I stepped out. I said to the record company who I was signed with, I said, listen, I want out. I won't do another record. What are you going to do? Well, I'm going to go and raise my kids and find a job and work in Quebec. So that's what I did. And you know what? Sometimes when you go through phases like that in your life, it's always fears that stop you from doing the right thing. Fear was there, believe me, but I did it, and I don't regret it a single minute. You know, I've been working here in Quebec as a hired gun for studio sessions, for Broadway shows, for Rick Hughes, for TV shows. I do my own recordings, and life is great.
Life is great. Let me go back here quickly, back to the 80s.
Okay.
You toured with Alice Cooper, and on the second album, Sweet Dreams, you had one of his producers, Jack Richardson, take part.
Exactly, yeah.
Jack, let me just give you some credits here for Jack so people know. Bob Seger's Night Moves, Alice Cooper, Love It to Death, Muscle of Love. He's done Man of War, Moxie, Badfinger, Guess Who, etc., etc., etc.
A legend.
An absolute legend. How was it working with him? And is that how come you got the Alice Cooper gig, or did you get Alice Cooper then Jack? What came first?
Jack came first, and what happened with Jack, with the late Jack Richardson, who had passed like a couple of years ago.
Yeah, 2011.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Mitch. The thing is that his son was starting his career. Garth Richardson, great producer. You know him, of course.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
From Rage Against and like countless
other bands.
Yes, other bands. Thanks. So the thing is that when we approached Jack said, "Yeah, I agree to do it if my son's in it with me." So we said, "Yeah, okay." And Garth was starting his career. So a couple of years after doing our album, Garth, on his own, without his dad, did the first Rage Against the Machine, Killing in the Name album. He's producer for that album. So, but that's how it came about. We when it came time to do our second album, the record company gave us some margin. It's okay. Who do you want to work with? So we started to think outside the box. You know, okay, we're doing metal, but still, where our influence were more like Zeppelin-esque and all of that. So who would be the perfect guy for us? And one of the guys of the band came with Jack Richardson, and we had some of us had to look him up.
Wow.
So it was a big chance for us that he said yeah.
Yeah, it must have been exciting because, I mean, you know, a guy who worked on Muscle of Love and Love It to Death, got to know a little something, right? I mean, those are great.
Yeah, he had that thing in his eye, you know. It was uncanny. But what I remember the most about Jack Richardson, and that is strange, is when we actually started the project. My brother and I invited him to like a family dinner. So we had Jack Richardson, the legend, in a little country house on the suburb of San Bruno. He was sitting with my brother and I and my mom, and we had spaghetti. Yeah. That's my biggest memory I have. You know, I worked with him for months doing the album, but that night when he came to my mom's house to have a
spaghetti dinner,
that was amazing. Oh. You cannot write that, you know.
That's a great story. So let me ask you one of the last two questions here. Is there, by definition, a Canadian metal sound? I mean, when you think of Sword and Helix and Anvil and Killer Dwarves and all those other bands, what makes it Canadian? What's the Canadian heavy metal sound?
That's a good question, man. Because especially with all the bands that you just mentioned, as you're mentioning them, I'm hearing the sound and it keeps coming back. So what is that sound? Yeah, there's a Canadian metal sound. Yeah, there is.
Because, you know,
probably the person that defines it the most, for me at least, is Lee Aaron. You know, Metal Queen.
Yeah, she's the greatest.
What's the Sword? I did a couple of gigs with her. She's a cool girl too.
Oh, she's fantastic. I've met her a couple of times. She's very, very nice. But it's just because, you know, when you think of the 80s in the States, you think of hair metal. And when you think of the UK, you think of the new wave of British heavy metal and you know, Tigers of Pantang and all. But when you think of Canadian, do we have a name? You know, we're not hair metal. We're not new wave of British heavy metal. Is there any kind of something that makes it uniquely Canadian?
I don't know, but one thing's for sure is that, like a band like Anvil, who's been doing it for 30, 40 years, huh? They're the best, man. They're the best. We've done a show with them a couple of years back. Sword did a show with Anvil in Germany.
Wow.
And in a festival in Germany. It's called Keep It True Festival. And one night we were like the headliner on a Friday. It's a big arena, you know, and they have all those metal fans from all across Europe coming to that festival. So one night we were headlining, and Anvil was headlining the next night. So we partied with them on our night, and we partied with them on their night. It was great, man. Lips is the best. He's the best.
That's great.
Yeah.
Is anything...
You know, Canadians are all we are, right? They finished their show. It was in an arena, so they go in the dressing room. So everybody's around the door, and they're waiting for them to come out. So they want to take pictures with lips and stuff, and everybody's waiting. And like there's a brouhaha. The door opens, and it's the drummer, and he's looking around, and then he sees me, and he sees my plant, you know, my plant from Sword, and he goes, "You, come in." So we had to like make our way through it and go inside the close the door, and Lips was waiting for me. He said, "Hey, Rick, come here. So how was my singing? Was it okay? I said, "Lips." So it was perfect, man. It was good. Everybody was having a good time. Yeah, but I had some hard time with my voice. And you sure it was okay? Yeah, it was fine. And then he had a big smile on his face and said, "All right, Jason, let's party."
That's funny.
I know.
Good old Lips, and they always play with their dildos and stuff on stage, which is totally ridiculous.
I did not know that. But
you didn't know that? He does a guitar solo, and he uses one of those to go up and down the neck of the guitar.
He's got props.
He's got props, exactly.
He's the carrot top of metal.
Yeah, he's the Carrot Top of Metal. Exactly. Is there anything happening with Sword? There was talk of a comeback and a live album and all this, or is that sort of on the shelf for now?
Well, it's on the shelf, yeah. The live album is done. We've recorded that with Motorhead at the Hammersmith. It's a great sounding album, but everybody's busy doing their stuff right now. So if one thing, this album's going to come out before new original material. This is going to take more time, more effort than we've put in.
When is the live album coming out? This year? Next year?
I don't know. I'm gonna have to pass on that question. This is a tough one.
It's a tough one. And last question, or last thing, I just wanted to say. You know, last summer I did this Kiss tribute album called "A World with Heroes," and you came on there and did a song, "The Oath," and you had Chris Buck, who's an up and coming talent, and you worked with Alan Niven of Guns N' Roses fame as a producer. I just wanted to thank you because the version of the song is absolutely fantastic. I mean, the vocal on that is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And it was for a good cause, so I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, Mitch, I accept you thanking me, but one thing's for sure is that it was a thrill of a lifetime for me to, one, help your cause, and two, work with Alan Neville and Chris Buck on that. It was like, wow, I was having a great time.
Yeah, it was a great project. So Rick, thank you.
Right.
As we say in Quebec, merci. And of course, we also say go Habs go. We throw that in at the end of every sentence.
Yeah, right now we're in the series, eh?
Yeah. It is important, as we say. So thank you, Rick. Always a pleasure talking to you.
And, you're the man.
Merci, as they say. Merci.
Well, merci.
I'm going to. There you go, Rick Hughes of Sword. Wow, what a great interview, Tim. Let's talk a little bit about BraveWords. You mentioned CanCon, and we talked about Much Music and how important they were to these bands, but so was BraveWords.
But we had to be inspired somewhere.
Right. And
growing up as a kid, it was like the Pepsi Power Hour, or whatever the heck it was called, the midweek Metal Meltdown. You can't forget about that. So it was the video. There wasn't very much on radio. So like there was a ton of kids focusing on that 1 hour a week. And it was, and whoever had the budget to make the video, or in the Killer Dwarfs case, like a video that was like, oh my God, this is the funniest thing, the most best produced. It like just everything that went behind Stand Tall was like, wow, this is just, man, I'm just like big smile on my face. So it was those kind of inspirational moments that kind of kicked into gear into writing and doing college radio and making a website about it right now.
Tim, Russ, let me ask you about Stand Tall, because, heavy metal, for the most part, has always taken itself very seriously. The imagery is always very serious. Everything's very serious. Was there any reticence or did you get any fallout from having done sort of a funny video?
Well, it's to each his own in that kind of situation, too. And, we've always taken the music seriously and the lyrics,
right, absolutely,
and ourselves, but but
the video was funny.
It was funny, but we've always had a great sense of humor too. If you've ever met anybody in the band, and I know Tim knows Daryl, and you know Daryl, and he's a character, and we always have a good laugh, and it just seemed like a great idea. And the people that were working with us, they worked in a lot of television, and had seen us too, and we always had that element in our live show. But we just took a theme and kind of ran with it. And, by the time we got to the epic stuff, when we did We Stand Alone, it started to get away from us a bit because all of a sudden we had more money. Now, when we did Stand Tall and Keep the Spirit, we had absolutely no money. Right. And it took forever to do them, but, it was all basically handcrafted, really focusing on that. But, it's to each his own, like I said. I never get any negative comments about it. I always get, oh, I love that, I remember that, oh my God, that was fun, hilarious, and that helped us, like we talked about, for everybody in the world to be able to see it. Those two videos, Keep the Spirit Alive and Stand Tall, off of Stand Tall, were at one point on MTV like the two most requested independent videos. So, you know.
I have to ask if I can interrupt, because just real quick, Mitch, do you mind?
No, of course not.
The premise of the vinyl pressing, who thought of that idea? And now we fast forward to 2014, although when I was working at the store, we always had a vinyl release for everything. So it's the thought that vinyl's coming back. What do you think about the whole vinyl comeback? But you guys, not that you started it, but you took it to another level.
Yeah, I think it is funny when you think back. Honestly, it's been so long I can't even remember. I know Keith Lennox, the director, he had a big hand in these storylines, and there was a couple other people that were definitely instrumental in it. But it just made sense, you know, to go along that theme. And yeah, vinyl's back. How odd. Yeah, I think at that time CDs had just come out. I think there was only 5,000 CDs of Stand Tall originally made. When that happened, but I don't know. Maybe we should redo a Stand Tall type video and show you how to make an MP3.
Yeah, you know. Yeah, we'll show you how to make an MP3. Later in the show, we're going to listen to Jason Rockman of Slaves on Dope, and that sort of covers the 90s, 2000 Kiss, not Kiss, but Canadian metal. See, I've always got Kiss on my brain.
Yes, you do.
I'm telling you.
Kiss or Metallica.
Kiss or Metallica. But let me throw out some Canadian bands from the 80s or even the 70s, and let me get your opinions on them. Let's start with the big one that sort of influenced everybody, Rush.
Rush, yes.
Tim and Russ, let's hear about Rush.
Well, for me...
Go ahead, Russ. Go ahead.
For me, it was, I was 13 years old, and I heard the first Rush album, or I had the first Rush album, and it totally changed my life, along like with Zeppelin and everything. But being Canadian, and you could actually go and see these guys, play. In your mind as a 13, 14-year-old, you probably think they're bigger than Led Zeppelin, but really, in reality, they were probably just struggling along in 1973 or 74. And then living in Toronto, Tim, I don't know if you grew up in Toronto, but I know you're a lot younger than me, but every New Year's Eve, there'd be Rush at the Maple Leaf Gardens for 2 or 3 nights, and it would be Max Webster and Rush, or April Wine and Rush. Every New Year's, I remember going down as a teenager to the Gardens on every New Year's Eve to see that. And you can't help but be proud of that band. They're such, they're so Canadian, really, and they're such individual, an individualist type of band. You know what I mean? They're themselves. Without any of those guys that left that band, there'd be no more Rush.
Yeah, and Tim, you're a big fan, right?
I'm a huge fan, but they're indescribable. It's very difficult to summarize them because you'd be doing them a disservice by describing them in like a little paragraph. Like every record, like no word of a lie, I'm a fan of every record. I don't think they've ever fallen on a record. Certainly they changed, and you were screaming at them when they did Signals, when the keyboards came in, or some of the more softer stuff in the 90s, but I go back and listen to these records all the time. There's no one in Canada that has a catalog, not even Neil Young. You could go into any of these bands that have had 100 records. Rush is by far the most talented and the most prolific, by far.
I'm sure some Anvil fans would disagree with both of you.
But Rush has had more records. When Anvil catches up, Anvil were crucial, and Lips knows this, and I love him, and Rob knows this. Anvil had 2 of the most important records ever to come out of here, with Metal on Metal and Forged in Fire.
Okay.
And I could talk about the whole thrash scene forever, because that is still on my iPod when I'm working out or doing whatever. Still a huge inspiration. The Razor, Exciter, Sacrifice, Annihilator. We had a scene that was, you know what I mean? You had, when Anvil would play L.A. or San Francisco, wherever, Hetfield would be like front row. You know what I mean? You hear about all these guys. You had Slash when the Anvil film came out. He was one of the video intros, right? Like they were a huge inspiration for a lot of bands, those first 2 Anvil records.
Let me ask you about that then, since you're talking about a scene. And of course, you worked at BraveWords. You had access to all these bands from all over the planet. And
not then, though.
Not then, but now.
And Barry.
Was there a Canadian metal sound? Is there something that makes Annihilator Canadian more than a band like if Metallica came in? Is there a sound that Canadian bands have?
You know what? I don't think so, and I think that's a great thing. Like there wasn't like a Bay Area sound. You can look at those really extreme bands that, and you can play Exciter, Razor, Anvil, Sacre, all back to back, and it's like they came from anywhere and everywhere. Like I don't think you can really say that we had much of a scene back then. Collectively we did, but sound wise, there was a lot of separation there.
Russ, was there a scene back then, or were the dwarves and all that sort of underground for a while?
I think it's hard to say, when you're right in it, we could probably talk about this forever, but we all played the same clubs, and, there was a lot more. You could actually go out and play 6 or 7 nights a week, all year round back then. So there was definitely a cult scene. And
were there regions that were more open to what you were doing? Did you do better in Montreal than you did in, Calgary? Did you?
I think we always. I think for music, Quebec, like they would send you far away. You'd be up in Sept-Îles and these far away places, and they loved all the metal. And obviously we played a lot of cover tunes then because, we only had one album and things. So, but I thought Quebec was really passionate about music, and as Alberta was too.
Really?
Definitely. We weren't allowed to come to Toronto. We couldn't play. None of us could come and play here because it would be the bands from the 70s that were still around that were pretty much capitalizing on the local scene. We were too young, so we had to go out in the trenches and do it. But there was always some place to play.
And Quebec saved heavy metal in the 90s and the early 2000s when it was a dead scene. Mm-hmm. After after the whole grunge thing, right?
Well, you're right. It's
huge.
They've never let it go.
No.
If you look at the statistics that used to be bandied about in the 90s and early 2000s, was that 7 out of 10 metal albums sold in Canada were sold in the province of Quebec. 70% of metal was being sold in Quebec.
Mm-hmm. Iron Maiden.
Wow. Yeah, and I've seen Iron Maiden all over the world. I've seen them in the States. I've seen them play in Ontario. But there is nothing like seeing Iron Maiden in Quebec City. Absolutely, it is a religious experience.
No doubt, yeah.
In terms of passionate audiences, sure. It's been fun to actually watch the Toronto scene grow, but we've always lagged behind Montreal and Quebec City. There'd be bands, I remember even like Deicide and all these extreme metal bands that would skip the rest of Canada, and they'd play like they'd play Rimouski. They'd play all these little party towns in Quebec, and it's like, what the hell? I'm in Toronto. Think about it. Toronto and RUSS.
Right.
Toronto, Hamilton. You know what I mean? That whole it's
London,
not just 2.5 million. Yeah, there's like what 3 to 5 million people, and a band can't draw there. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's I'm it's very disappointing to see the way Toronto is at this point, and I know there's a lot of great young bands that are dying to play. And, you see some of them, like when we play here, a lot of these bands, get to play with us, which is great. But I would hate to be in, my 20s now trying to survive in this country. I'm sad to say,
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the 70s before and the 70s bands. Let's talk about Triumph. Huge Canadian band, good influence. Who wants to start first with their thoughts? Russ?
Well, I like Triumph. I don't think they're the most original band, but I enjoyed them, and they always put a great show on. And I was a kid, and I saw them at the high school, and saw them at the gardens, and in theaters and stuff. They were very smart business wise. I think there was more of a thought out corporate thing rather than I think. Obviously they have some great tunes, but I don't know. I like them definitely. I like the first album a lot.
What about you, Tim? Is Triumph an essential Canadian band?
Yeah, for the most part with me. I don't think that they've really weathered the storm over time. Like there was talk, like they played Sweden rock, and there was talk of bringing them into the States. This was a couple of years back, but the people, just not enough fans. Like which is remarkable because some of those 70s records, like they were just massive. I love Allied Forces. Like I'll never forget watching the RUSS Festival and Triumph came on and there's like 500,000 people. It's like, my God. And let's not forget, maybe aside from Rush or maybe at the same level as Rush, they are like extremely talented. Like Rick Emmett, he still teaches. Like these guys are geniuses. They really are. But they kind of have like the ELO syndrome where it's this classic hard rockish band. But I'm not saying nobody cares because you still hear them on the radio. And that's maybe where CanCon benefits a lot of bands. But in terms of them actually doing a big reunion tour, it ain't going to happen. There's
bring
not followers.
Bring out the boxing gloves.
Yeah.
Call my lawyer.
Yeah.
That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
Have your people talk to my people.
Right.
Yeah, they're a great party band, and they're definitely in the Canadian scheme of what we all did and everything. And they do get played on the radio. I hear it almost every day if I'm listening to FM or something. Lay it on the line, stuff like that. You know what I mean? They don't play Dwarfs, but they play a Triumph. Let's fight.
Well, listen, Sirius XM plays the Dwarfs all the time.
That's right.
So.
They play us every day.
See?
And Metal Tim talks about us all the time, so it's all
there
good.
we go.
Yeah,
listen. The Dwarfs love BraveWords, by the way, and that's how I initially met Mitch.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk of BraveWords talk or Killer Dwarves talk on BraveWords. Let's look at some of the other Canadian bands real quick, especially ones that we're all friends with. Brian Vollmer and, of course, Helix. Boy, they knocked it out of the park with Rock You, and
I was on that song.
Were you really?
Yeah, I was on the screaming background vocals.
Really, I didn't know that.
There you go. You learn something every day, and I got to call Brian back. That reminds me. Anyways, yeah.
Tim,
what's your take on Helix?
It was even before that, of course. Like Walking the Razor's Edge, it was like once again, video was huge, but like Does a Fool Ever Learn and Heavy Metal Love? Like
great
those were great songs.
Sure.
Walking just took it to the next level. I love this story because they opened up that heavy metal hurricane when it was Helix, Kick-Axe, Quiet Riot, and the Scorpions at the CNE. But I was one of the kids that ran, and I'm like, oh my God, I just hit something, which was the bar in front of the stage. No earplugs. I couldn't hear can I put an F-bomb in here?
Yeah, of course.
A fucking week. But yeah, I was like 3 feet away from all these bands. I'm like, oh my God, it was just like, it was heaven. No, Brian, they don't get enough.
They don't get enough love.
They're an awesome band for sure. And we've known those cats forever, and they were a couple years older than us, and they always put on a great show. They're super entertaining. You know what I mean? It's not a dull event. And I was at that same show. That was an awesome show. Kick-Axe. Awesome band. Another awesome Canadian band.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Another Canadian band. But let me ask you about this one band that we all saw the videos and we all sort of maybe snickered a bit, maybe laughed a bit, but Thor. Not the Marvel comic character, but the Canadian band. Thoughts on Thor?
Keep the dogs away.
You got to keep the dogs away. You got to keep the dogs at bay.
That was kind of a fun song. But yeah, for the most part, he's more of a comic book character than anything. And that's the song that sticks out. In fact, when I was doing a lot of programming for the internet stations, Mitch, that I used to work for, that was one of the songs that people looked at me and laughed. I'm like, why are you programming this song? I'm like, well, you didn't grow up with this song, so it fits in this, like the hairband station or whatever. Yeah. And the video was hilarious, the dogs.
Yeah, there's room for everybody, you know what I mean? Like you're not listening to Yes every minute. Sometimes you might listen to Motley Crue or Poison or and you remember that song. See, that song is still, if you were around here, you still remember it, right? And a good friend of mine played with Thor too. He still does actually a bit. Frank Soda from Frank Soda and the Imps. I don't know if you guys probably are way too young for that, but he was another guy from Toronto that had a great rock show. Like back in those days, I hate to keep going back, but in the 70s and early 80s, bands would play 6 nights a week. And they all had albums out. They were all original bands, and they would play 2-3 shows a night. And you could go down Toronto in a number of venues and see, these great musicians doing that stuff. And it's sad that it's gone. And
they'd play at the Roxy and Barrie.
That's right, the Roxy and Barrie. Or, oh God, The Wellington.
Yeah.
The Welly.
I do want to get us to our interview with Jason Rockman of Slaves on Dope, bringing us in sort of the 90s. But real quick, what do we think of Honeymoon Suite and Kim Mitchell? They're not obviously heavy metal, but I think very respectable as Canadian hard rock bands, right?
Absolutely, 100%.
They're part of the tree. They're part of the tree, absolutely.
Yeah, they definitely deserve. Now, it would be nice to see Kim Mitchell maybe get on the road and do a few more shows and maybe another album, because...
Yeah, it would be. It'd be good to see Max Webster come back.
Absolutely. Now...
I want to hear the rest of that first EP he did when he first went solo. Misdemeanor, Big Best Summer, classic.
Right. Yeah, that was a great album.
Now, as the 80s wrapped up, we got into nu metal, and Slaves on Dope were one of those Canadian bands that led the charge in that. Jason Rockman now works at Show'em FM and does some stuff for CTV, but he's still out there singing. They were just at the Amnesia Rock Fest, and I had a chance to catch up with him a couple of weeks ago. Let's have a listen to that. So we're talking with Jason Rockman of Slaves on Dope. How you doing, Jason?
I'm good, man. I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, I've been exploring Canadian music with a bunch of different artists, and Slaves on Dope sort of represents the 1990s of Canadian metal and Canadian rock. When you think back to the 80s and you think of sort of the hair metal, you can sort of think of Helix and Killer Dwarfs, and even if you want Honeymoon Suite, yet they were all sort of uniquely Canadian. As you moved into the 90s, was there a uniquely Canadian sound when you think of Slaves on Dope, Pulse Ultra, and some of the other bands coming out of on the scene?
Well, I mean, Slaves on Dope, really, we made our mark. We really made our mark internationally, or I would say more in North America, in 2000. So the 90s were really. It's kind of like we were in the juniors in the 90s. We formed in the 90s and we really cut our teeth in Canada.
Right.
But then when we moved to the U.S. in '99, that's when we really got our first shot. So, we kind of lasted the 90s to get our big shot in the 2000s. I think for me, the sound that really formed our band and that mattered to me a lot was a lot of the 90s Canadian stuff that came out, like the Our Lady Peace, the Tea Parties, the I'm Mother Earths, those kind of bands that really were kind of the bands that we looked up to in a way. And you mentioned bands like Pulse Ultra. They kind of came. I remember being in California when we had moved there, and Dominic, the guitar player, calling up our old bass player Frank and talking to him about, should we move to California too? So I know that we kind of opened the door for them in a way.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that 90s, for me, the 90s sound really was different. And there was a lot more, a lot of bands that were just kind of taking what was going on in the U.S. and just making it their own.
All right. Let me ask you about. Let's back up to the 80s. Were you a fan of those Canadian bands? Were you sort of up on the Canadian scene, or were you more drawn to bands outside of Canada?
You know what? I mean, in the 80s, I mean, obviously I grew up on Show'em, right? Which is a Montreal rock station. Which you're
a member of now. You're actually
where I work, yeah. But I mean, I grew up listening to Show'em, so a lot of the music, that I would hear that was Canadian would come from Show'em, because Show'em had a certain amount of CanCon that they have to play. So I grew up, listening to a lot of, in the 80s, there was a lot of 5440, there was a lot of Kim Mitchell, there was a lot of April Wine. So there was it was more of the rock and roll. I wouldn't say so much the metal.
Right.
So I was really, in terms of Canadian music, that was the Canadian music that I would listen to, maybe stuff like the Northern Pikes. But when it came to anything else, a lot of the stuff I listened to in the 80s was a lot of British stuff. Like if it was metal, it would be Priest, it would be Maiden, or it would be a lot of the new wave stuff that was coming out.
Yeah, and so why was it then that you went into sort of the hard rock stuff? Because you obviously weren't listening to Voivod, and you weren't listening to the Helixes and stuff. What drew you to the harder sounds?
I think when I discovered Faith No More, that was the band that kind of bridged the gap for me.
Okay.
They were the band that kind of showed me that, you know, you could do heavy music, but you didn't have to be the typical heavy metal guy.
Right.
And I think that's what appealed to me because, you know, the whole heavy metal scene, I liked certain aspects of it, but I didn't like the idea of being attached to like a scene. Like, you know, if someone saw me, they're like, oh, it's a metal guy. You know, I just like kind of being me. And what I liked about Faith No More is they were just themselves.
They really were.
They really were unique, and they had so many different aspects of different music that was going on at the time that they kind of fused into their own sound. So they were the biggest influence for Slaves on Dope, that's for sure. I know my guitar player, Kevin, grew up on all those bands you talked about. He grew up on, you know, he loved the LA scene. He loved the British scene. He loved Canadian metal. He loved Voivod. So he definitely brought that element to the band. And I think I brought a lot of different elements and different music that he didn't necessarily get. And we kind of fused that together. So, I mean, Faith No More were pretty much the godfathers for us.
You know, and I'll keep harping back to those bands. Those bands that I mentioned had a reasonable amount of success in the 80s. And, you know, you also mentioned the CanCon rules, which for people who don't know are the Canadian content rules where radio and TV have to sort of adhere to. Why did you have to move to Los Angeles then? Why could you not have succeeded just being uniquely Canadian and staying in Montreal or in Toronto? Why did it necessitate a move to Los Angeles?
Well, we had moved, you know, across Canada so many times in terms of touring, like we'd gone back and forth. We had tried all the labels in Canada, and for us, it was pretty much a last-ditch effort. We said, look, if we're going to make a go at this, we really got to go where, you know, what we're doing is happening right now. And we were kind of pushed in, you know, lumped into that Limp Bizkit,
right?
You know, Korn, Deftones sound. But we were more into Sepultura. You know, like Roots was a big record for us. That really made us say, wow, you can do metal and you can do stuff that has choruses and you can be heavy. And it was a whole new world for us. So when we were doing the music we were doing, we realized we'd probably make a much better go of it if we moved to the U.S. And at the time, we were managed by a guy named Michael White, who used to manage Tea Party. And he had suggested to us, he said, look, why don't you make an effort and go to LA? I can hook you up with a couple of names of managers, a couple of names of booking agents, and do your best and get out there and see what can happen. And it was really a show that Fear Factory did with Static X at Metropolis that really changed a lot for us. They came through town, and we ended up talking to the guys in Static X and talking to Dino from Fear Factory, and they gave us some names of people in LA, and they said, look, these are the people you should talk to if you want to get shows. And we really followed through, and we did it. We gave it a 6-month time frame. We said, let's see what can happen in 6 months.
Wow, only 6 months?
Yeah, we saved up our money, and we left all the money we needed to for the people that had homes and girlfriends and stuff that needed to pay bills still. And we said, this is the money you need for the time we're gone, and we're going to go and see what we can make out of this. And within 3 months, we used all the contacts that we had been given, and we made it happen,
the watershed moment for a lot of those hard rock metal bands was Nirvana. There was the Nirvana effect that sort of killed the entire scene. That's when your Killer Dwarves and your Honeymoon Suites and all those bands sort of, and of course your Rats and Poisons all sort of disappeared into the woodwork. Did that also sort of decimate the Canadian music scene that sort of made bands like yourself say, all right, there's nothing left here? I mean, was it that bad?
Well, I mean, Nirvana... I think Nirvana and the Seattle scene and all that music, it ushered in another wave of bands probably that I related to a bit more. Okay. Where I was just like, you didn't have to have all this glam and this glitz and this, this hair. You could just go and you could show up and play and have good songs, which was always something that I related to.
Right.
So, I mean, for me, I look back on some of that music and it really still holds up 20 years later.
It really does. Now, of course, you were on OZZfest, and there's always been these rumors or these sort of insinuations that being on OZZfest was a positive but also a negative. Positive in the sense that you got exposure, but negative because there was a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes where bands had to pay $75,000 to be on the bill and all this stuff. What was your OZZfest experience, and did you have to deal with Sharon personally, or how did this all sort of work out?
Well, the one, just to clarify something, because a lot of people don't realize at the time when we were on OZZfest, there was this thing where bands had to pay $75,000, but it wasn't bands paying $75,000. It was the label would have to commit to $75,000 of advertising.
Okay.
So
that's a bit different.
Right. They would have to partner in with group ads at Best Buys and at the record stores and then wherever they would advertise, you would have to commit that much of a budget to advertising. That's what it was. So it wasn't necessarily a buy-on, which a lot of people think that which is a lot of what happens now. Much more. There's a lot more buy-ons that happen now than there did back then.
Okay.
Back then, you could actually go out and make a living on the road because you could still count on your label to at least fund you, and you could sell your T-shirts, and you weren't necessarily worrying about the tour support because it would be there for you, which is very different now. Now, a lot of bands will bring baby bands on the road with them and ask them for $15,000 to actually make them a living.
Right.
But I think, being on OZZfest for us was nothing but a positive thing. We had a different ride than other people because we were on Sharon's label. So we, so it was a bit of a different trip for us. But on the other side of it, when we were offered to do OZZfest in a bus, we said, no, we want to do it in a van and an RV because we want to have more money to tour longer, So we definitely went into that with eyes open, realizing that people would probably think we were, favorites and we were being played as favorites. So we went in there trying to be as humble as we could. But yeah, I mean, OZZfest for me was nothing but a great experience. The year we were on, 2000, was probably the best year. I mean, it was the year that Pantera, co-headlined with Ozzy. So for me, I got to see every band that I loved at the time, almost every day that summer. I got to see Pantera. I got to see Soulfly. I got to watch Queens of the Stone Age every day at 1 o'clock. I mean, it's like a dream come true.
Actually, that's not a bad way to spend the summer, right? Watching all those.
It was a nice way to spend the summer, yeah.
Now your last full-length album is Over the Influence. Are you working on anything new?
Yeah, we have. We've got about 12 or 13 songs that are done. Kevin and I just started writing lyrics this week, so we're going to have a release probably in the next 6 months for sure. We'll have something out.
Awesome.
We're just working at a much slower pace than we used to.
Yeah.
But definitely. I mean, we've put quotes in for pressing. Like we're ready to go. We've got album art. We've got album artwork, concept all done already. So it's just a matter of getting in there and finishing some stuff up, and then definitely going to be another record. Hopefully by the end of the year.
Heavy metal has sort of always been tagged as being this sort of very aggressive metal or very aggressive kind of music that that requires some kind of piss and vinegar coming from the artist. As you've gotten older, how do you maintain that level of aggression? And is it aggression or is it just, is it something else?
Well, I think it's energy that comes out. I mean, I think it's certain styles of music. Different energy will come out, I think, with metal and with harder rock, probably just due to the fact that the BPMs are faster. Your adrenaline's at a different level than it would be, say, if you're playing, smooth jazz.
Right.
But it's for me, I know that the recovery time is a lot longer between shows than it used to be.
Yeah, your neck must be sore, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, we definitely, when we play, we still give it 100%. So, I think it's a great way to channel energy. Is it aggression? Yeah, it can come across as aggression. I mean, when I look back at pictures of us playing sometimes, and some of the the shots that some of the photographers will catch of us, will be like, man, I look mean. So I'm not like that at all. But yeah, it definitely it's an outlet. I think it's an outlet, kind of like running can be, or weightlifting, or training. It's and it's an outlet where you'll get probably the same kind of faces.
Same kind of faces, same kind of rush.
Yeah, I think if someone's pushing their last rep on a bench press, you might see some similar faces that you'll see to a guy that's going through the last chorus of the song that's super heavy.
Looking back at the last 30 years of Canadian music, what are some of the most influential or biggest bands that you can remember, or which ones are the biggest to you?
Well, Our Lady Peace were a big influence to us because they were a band that brought us out on the road with them really early.
Right.
I really respected, the dent that they made in the U.S. The Doughboys, another band to me, were a big part of shaping me as an artist. like I just, they were one of the first bands that I knew that actually went out and got a U.S. record deal. Like they were signed to A&M, and it was like, wow. And I think there's a few bands lately that have been coming out that we've been kind of supporting at Shome, like a band like Half Moon Run. I mean, I know this isn't metal at all, but a band like that can put out a debut record like they did and be so young just blows my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not. As I do this special, I'm also going to go get a band like Glass Tiger and stuff like that to sort of talk about the history of rock. But what about bands like Triumph and Rush and April Wine?
Oh, I mean, April Wine to me and Rush, and those they're in another stratosphere. Like I listened to April Wine. I went to see them for the first time 2 years ago in January. I think it was probably 2 years ago. And I had never seen them before, and I kind of bummed that I didn't get to see them with Jerry Mercer drumming. But nonetheless, they were just like a hit factory, It was like one good song after another. So, I'm thinking of younger bands that shaped me more as a musician.
Yeah.
Like bands like April Wine, bands like Rush, guys like Frank Marino and Mahogany Rush. Those are more of my fabric. I mean, that's like, that's going back to Shome. I mean, that's pretty much part of my DNA.
Yeah.
That's it. To me, they're a band like Rush is on the same par as a band like Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, good point. Good point. And of course, Led Zeppelin got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame pretty much de facto, whereas Rush needed petitions and protests and people pointing out, hey, why aren't they in? Sort of silly, right? That whole Rock and Roll Hall of Fame thing. Yeah,
it's an interesting. I'm especially after this year. I mean, you induct Kiss in, and then you fudge the rules a bit, and you do that to a band like Kiss, who are going to take everything and blow it out of proportion.
Yeah, but
it really left a bad taste in my mouth. And I've visited the hall, like I've been there many times, and it's a really cool place to go.
Right. But it does make you wonder, though, sometimes when you see some of the guys from the E Street Band that played on the first album, and you couldn't spot them if you had a map, and then you get a band like Kiss, and then they start fudging rules. But anyway, it's an interesting organization, but
it is, and I think it's like any kind of award panel, or it's the cool kids club, and when you're not part of that, it can suck. But just the fact that Kiss got in after all these years, when obviously they weren't automatically part of the cool kids, I think was great, and I think that should be celebrated.
Yeah, it should be, and hopefully someday we'll see a Cheap Trick, and we'll see Judas Priest, and we'll see Iron Maiden, and we'll see some of those other sort of uncool bands.
I mean, if Judas Priest and Iron Maiden aren't in the hall yet.
No, they're not.
Wow, that's disgusting. Come on.
I mean, essentially, the only metal that is in there is Black Sabbath. Now, you can maybe argue that Guns N' Roses is metal, and you can argue that maybe Van Halen is metal, and then maybe Kiss. Yeah. But in terms of like the real, that metal era, Ronnie James Dio as a solo artist is not in. Judas Priest is not in. Iron Maiden is not in. Megadeth is not in. I mean, these are bands that change things, right? I mean, they had an influence. And
we should start a heavy metal Hall of Fame.
Yeah, we really should. I mean, that is something. I guess it's a niche kind of project, but I think it's needed because it's completely being ignored. When you're looking at a Rock Hall of Fame and you've got Run DMC in the Rock Hall of Fame and you've got Bruce Dickinson not in, you go, huh? Okay.
No, for sure. It makes you wonder.
There's a problem here.
I mean, when Public Enemy got inducted. I mean, me being a massive Public Enemy fan, I was really happy because to me they were always the most rock and roll out of all those bands.
Yeah, but Public Enemy, I can actually argue for. I mean, first of all, they stretched the boundaries of what they were doing in whatever you want to call it, rock. I mean, not rock, but rap or hip hop. But they also did that stuff with Anthrax and
don't forget Run DMC did.
Aerosmith.
Run DMC was before that they did this thing. They had a song called Rock Box,
right? Yeah.
And that was probably one of the first times electric guitar was used in hip hop. So, they were a big part of that crossover. I'm happy Run DMC's in there. I think they deserve it.
Oh,
Public Enemy deserve it more.
No, listen, I believe those bands deserve it. I just believe that it's hard to leave the band like Judas. Anyway.
Priest and Maiden should be in there 100%.
So, slavesondope.com if people want to check out all the goings-on of the band. It's amazing, though, to think that you've had a 25-year, 26-year career now, if you go back to, like, the club days?
Well, we're 20, actually, we're 20...
21.
22 years.
God. Unbelievable, huh?
Yeah, it goes by really fast. Makes me feel really fucking old.
Good, and of course this year, if people want to see you, there's the Amnesia Rock Fest where you'll be on the bill with who's on there this year? It's Motley Crue, Megadeth.
It's more like who's not on it.
Right, pretty much.
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, Mastodon are on. Who we're talking about bands. Mastodon to me are pretty much the best metal band out there right now.
Agreed.
Love them. Offspring are on. I'm sorry. Blink-182 are on. God, Alice in Chains are on. I mean, there's so many bands on that damn festival that I can't even remember how many bands are on it.
Right.
If that makes any sense. Weezer's on it. Every hardcore band imaginable is on that thing. Henry Rollins is doing spoken word there. It's crazy. I mean, pretty much between that and Heavy Montreal, we've got a great great summer.
I know Heavy Montreal is going to be crazy, but with Twisted Sister and Megadeth, and not Megadeth, Metallica, great stuff.
Yeah,
so
when they added Twisted Sister, I was super happy. But yeah, we'll be playing at Rockfest this summer, and then we're doing a couple other shows that we're going to be announcing in the next couple of weeks.
Great. Well, thank you, Jason. Always a pleasure.
My pleasure, man.
And
anytime.
Yeah, there you go, folks. The '90s wrapped up with Jason and Slaves on Dope. And, of course, check you out on Showman CTV.
Yep.
Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, man.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks.
There you have it. Jason Rockman of Slaves on Dope telling us about playing on the OZZfest and what the band's up to these days. Speaking of festivals, remember Heavy Montreal, August 9th and 10th at Parc Jean Drapeau with Bad Religion, Voivod, 3 Days Grace, Anthrax, Slayer, and yes, you guessed it, Metallica. Tim, Russ, pleasure having you on this episode.
Thanks,
Tim, tell us a little more about the updated BraveWords, and tell us a little more about having made that big switch from going from a print magazine to online, and how sort of the whole business for you has changed.
Well, the upcoming BraveWords is under a veil of secrecy, so that answers question number one. We've been just working on it forever, and it's coming soon. So and it will just appear.
Right.
It will just appear, and I will just say coming soon. But yeah, it was a big heartache when we it was like putting your kid to bed, right? Or your puppy died. It's like, and I still to this day have people asking for subscriptions, and we printed our last issue in 2008. That's how funny it is.
Right.
Not funny, but that's how, I guess, important it was. So I thank you for asking the question. But yeah, no, it was quite heartbreaking. It was just a matter of economics. We got to issue 113. My layout guy started to lay out 4 and 14. By the way, Metallica, who's on Heavy MTL, was on our last issue. Yeah. And that's probably still our biggest seller because I still sell copies out of my warehouse of it. People want it. But yeah, we started to lay it out, and I'm like, I'm not going to have to sell my house to make issue 114. We just got to transfer everything online. It went from the magazine funding the website to the website funding the magazine. So that whole thing just kind of turned over, and yeah, we were able to survive just with the website to this day. So, but it's been, I never thought I'd work, and I'm not trying to create a sob story here. The website, when we were doing the magazine, 10 issues a year, you know what I mean? It would it would leave, and then, you know what I mean? I'd have like a break of like a day or two, and then we start working on the next one. But there's no break on the web. And when people say, "Oh my God, I wish we had the magazine," it's like, dude, when I was editing the news of the magazine, some kid was gonna get it who subscribed 2 months later. Like, how does that service the scene? Now we're getting updates 24/7. We're posting like 100+ stories a day. Yep. We've got audio, video, this and that going all the time. And you want the magazine? God, get the Sears catalog and bring that to the shitter.
But the other great part of the BraveWords magazine, though, was the knuckle tracks. That's where bands got to discover, not only, or fans I should say, got to discover not only great bands that were, buying to be on the knuckle tracks, but a lot of Canadian bands that couldn't afford, to get on radio or to pay for a commercial on TV, had enough to get onto these knuckle tracks.
Yeah, that was pretty crazy. People keep bringing it up, and it was when it was bagged, we could put anything in it, whether it be a condom or something, and then I was able to, and the store helped me a lot because I would see a lot of the labels, and it just made sense, and it sold a shitload of records. You know what I mean? The magazine was by far HMV's biggest selling magazine, but at the same time, it was helping feed the scene. And as you say, like all these kids would grab it, and even if they didn't even read the magazine, they had the CD on, and the tracks on there were, for the most part, I mean, there were some great bands on there. So if you had a kid that picked up the magazine and bought half of those bands, which would be like 18, so it'd be like 6 or 7 albums. Like there was a good business model there, right? So we had a great run with it. So it was sad to put that down. But as you see with the current site, there's the Knuckle Tracks audio player, and I will let something out of the bag. We will have an audio player with the new site.
So it's essential.
It is essential. It's not radio, but at least we can put the focus track of the day. Like you look at the site right now, and there's like the new Priest single. We just put up the new Overkill single, new Ace Frehley. Like it's the songs that people want to hear. If the Killer Dwarfs would come up with a song, it would go there, and that has been there, right? So it's, as I say, I'm not here to replace radio. I'd like to get back into radio, but it was cool. So thank you for bringing that up.
Let me ask Russ about that. Russ, radio obviously is very important, or it certainly was back in the day for the Killer Dwarfs. Much music and television, obviously very important for the Killer Dwarfs. What did a magazine like BraveWords, dedicated to hard rock, do for a band like Killer Dwarfs?
Well, I think magazines like BraveWords and Kerrang and stuff like this, for the hardcore fans who really want to see some pictures and hear some, an interview you might not have heard, because normal radio wouldn't play you or have you interviewed or anything. This is, you'd have to read it, right? Back then. And, we didn't have any internet or anything. We used orange cans with strings, and that was the joke part. Holy.
I got it.
Okay, thanks. Insert laugh here. But I love, like you guys are talking about, BraveWords. I watch it every day because I can see something a couple times a day, a news update or some, Bruce Dickinson just said Metallica sucks, and stuff like this or whatever. I don't know. I love reading that stuff. It's more for hardcore, people. I'm not saying hardcore music, but music lovers in general.
Yeah, BraveWords is absolutely.
I don't know how you do it, Tim, because like being in a band is bad enough, but now you have to keep up with a zillion bands. Like,
yeah, it's insane. It really is insane.
Like, when do you actually go to sleep and you turn your brain off and stuff?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And with the new site and the new paint job, it can only get crazier. So let's. It's all good though.
Yeah,
that's what hockey is. It's an outlet. You know what I mean? You need to exercise. It's a balance, right? So, but yeah, it's as I said. When we stopped the magazine, I never thought I would work so bloody hard in my life, and it's totally true. 24/7. It's amazing, but it does get exhausting.
It really does. So let's wrap up this episode of One on One. Let's of course remind fans, Heavy Montreal coming August 9th and 10th at Parc Jean Drapeau. Evenko, the promoter, is also having Skid Row in town at the Corona Theatre August 19th. If of course you don't live in Montreal, do find a Skid Row show somewhere around the globe and support the band. Great band. Check out RUSS and the Killer Dwarfs playing this summer at, tell us about the Bronze event, the wedding.
Oh, yeah. Daryl's wedding event. That is going to be July 25th with Ted Poley, John Corabi, Cheap Thrill, which is members of Cinderella, and Dunk will be getting hitched by Luke Carl of Sirius Satellite Radio. He's a minister, and Krabby's actually a minister too. So
is he really?
He is. They're both ordained ministers.
Are you a minister?
No, I'm a doctor, a witch doctor. But this is a great place. Friends of ours have this in Akron, New York. It's called Bronze Concert Cove. It's like a 3,000. You can hold 3,000 to 4,000 people. It's an outdoor shed. Greatest people, most hospitable. Ray and Andrea Braun are kind enough to put on this show for free. It's a free show.
Wow.
And I think you can get tickets. I think if you go to Facebook, Killer Dwarfs Facebook, you can get tickets there, and it's going to be fun. A fun day, and then a couple weeks of rehab.
Yeah, of course. Well, who's the rehab for? For you or for Daryl after getting married?
Daryl's a pirate, so he's he's all good to go.
And of course, remember, check out BraveWords.com, your one and only site for everything heavy metal. And of course, on my behalf, thank you for all the support BraveWords has shown me over the years for one-on-one and all the other writing and nonsense that I've put out. And of course, Russ, I would imagine, thanks BraveWords for supporting the Dwarves all these years too.
I love it. You guys have always been behind us 100%. Hope you have a great launch, and I'm sure we'll see you shortly.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Get it? See you shortly?
That's right.
Looking forward to see you on the road. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it, man. Wish us luck.
Yeah. Have a good one, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Cheers, guys.
Bye
Take care.